What's up everyone? In the last video, we got the engine cleaned up so we can begin the maintenance on it. We've already gone over the bottom end of the motor by replacing the oil pan seal and rear main seal. In this video, I'm going to work on the top end and begin disassembling the head. Eventually, I'm going to replace a lot of the seals up top, clean the head and intake manifold, replace the head gasket, timing belt, and much more. Let's go ahead and get started on taking this M20 apart. This right here is the distributor cap. The contacts do look worn down a little bit, so we're going to go ahead and replace this part while we're replacing everything else. This part right here is called the distributor rotor, and it's held in by some Allen bolts, which are really easy to strip. If you do strip them, I wouldn't be too worried about it. The new distributor rotor comes with its own brand new set of bolts anyways, so just do whatever you can to get this out. With the upper timing cover off, you can take off the bracket that holds on and tightens the alternator. We don't need to remove the alternator fully, but we're just going to get rid of this bracket for now. Next, pop off the lower timing cover. This part might have been the worst, absolute worst part. Basically, to get this fan clutch off, I was struggling with two people, one person to hold the wrench, that holds the water pump pulley, and another person to actually turn the wrench. Basically what I did was put the water pump pulley wrench resting against the crankshaft, and then it holds really good. And basically once you do that, you just take your sledgehammer, knock on this, and eventually it'll break loose. The final step before removing the timing belt is to make sure that your camshaft is at top dead center. You can check this by seeing the tick mark on the cam pulley, and then there's also should be a tick mark on the cylinder head. Those two tick marks should line up, and then you'll also see another tick mark on the crank pulley at the very bottom, and then you'll see another corresponding notch right there in the lower timing cover. So just line up that bottom tick mark with that notch, and then if the bottom tick mark is lined up and the top is also lined up, then you know that you're at top dead center. If you don't see the bottom tick mark, that just means you're 180 degrees out of rotation. So just give the crank another full spin or half spin, and then you should be able to align both tick marks, top and bottom. To remove the intake manifold, it's just a bunch of nuts. You can see them like kind of all around down here. Just take them all out, and then you do have this little brace bracket right there, so just take out those two nuts. And then if you're having a little trouble getting it off, just take your trusty hammer, give it a few light taps, and then you should be able to see it start separating from the cylinder head. Also, disconnect these two sensors right here going into the thermostat housing. The other thing you gotta watch out for is this oil return tube. You gotta kind of simultaneously pull this down while you slide this out, and then it can come off. Don't forget about this hose too. What's this stuff? So after taking off the intake manifold, I'm looking at these intake runners, and there's a disgusting amount of carbon buildup in there. It's kind of hard to see, but yeah, it's like a thick layer of black. One of these runners, you can see it's clear, mostly clean, you can see the metal, but for some reason, these back 5 are like extremely gunked up. So I'm gonna spray some carb cleaner in there, just let it sit and see if any of this won't dissolve. So the carb cleaner worked really well. You can see how much of the black deposit gunk is gone. Definitely a big improvement. Like before, there was a layer of carbon buildup. Much better now. So in order to get this painted, we're gonna have to also remove the fuel rail. There's 4 10mm bolts. So just take your little wrench and they come off pretty easily. So the fuel rail is actually pretty difficult to get off. It's stuck on there really tight. I don't recommend doing this, but this is what I'm gonna try. Just get a little big screwdriver, flathead, and a little sledge, and then just give it some light taps. And then just a little bit of pressure will help break the seal and break it loose. And this is the only way I could see to get it started, and it's actually working. Yeah, once you get them all loose, basically it'll just fall right out. Let's get this last one out. Oh, there we go. And now the fuel rail is out. To get the connector off, just rotate the little washer at the end and it'll separate. And then you can get your fuel rail out. And yeah, you can see the condition of these O-rings. Definitely gonna replace these while we can. With the intake manifold out of the way, we can easily just pop off the valve cover. Next, we'll take off the water pump and the rest of the front end accessories. So it's actually very interesting. You can see all of this oil residue on the water pump beyond the gasket. So this is telling me that this gasket failed, and here's at least one of the source of my oil leaks. And then you can even tell how there's like a little drip going down right here. I would never have thought that the water pump would be a source of an oil leak, but here we are. For the tensioner, first undo the top bolt, and once you loosen the bottom one, the tension will automatically come out. And then just take this guy off, and then we can slip the belt off. Or, yeah, actually the belt is pretty much coming, yeah, right off. So the camshaft seal actually wasn't too bad to pop off. Basically, once you kind of get the ears sideways, you can kind of like wedge it back and forth and it comes out pretty easy. Next, to remove the cylinder head, we need to remove the head stud bolts. There's a specific pattern you need to loosen the bolts, and it's that same pattern you use to retighten the head once you put it back on. So make sure you pull up a diagram to follow the correct order in which to loosen the bolts. Here you can see me bagging up the old bolts, but I'm actually going to discard them. These head bolts are actually stretch bolts and they're meant for one-time use only. So when I reattach the cylinder head later on, I'm going to be using brand new head studs. You can see in some spots how this head gasket looks alright, it's bone dry and looks good, but then in other areas you can see how there's a little bit of oily residue, even some coolant spillage, so this head gasket has definitely failed. I wasn't originally intending on replacing it, but after pulling the cylinder head and inspecting it, I'm glad I am going to replace it. So similar to how my intake manifold was full of gunk and carbon and just looked pretty disgusting overall, my pistons were in really bad shape as well. There was a ton of carbon buildup just caked on the pistons. So using a similar method, I just used carb cleaner, a brush, and some paper towels, and then just a little bit of scrubbing and they look brand new again. So after cleaning the pistons, you want to clean the surface of the block. And you can see I already did this half, and my god, what a difference. This side is pretty nasty and grimy. So all I'm doing is just kind of using a little bit of carb cleaner, or you can use your preferred degreaser that you want. Put some on like a scouring pad, something that's not too rough or abrasive, and then just lightly wipe back and forth until you get all the gunk off. If you have any really stubborn spots, you can try using a razor blade scraper, but I only had to use this in like a few areas, not really a whole lot. The carb cleaner by itself should get most of this dirt out. Now I know that some of you might be thinking I should have really just resurfaced the block, but I don't really have time for that, and I found that this was equally as effective. Now that the block is looking good, we can move on to the cylinder head. Let's go ahead and remove the spark plugs. Holy smokes, so the old spark plugs are pretty bad. And here is what a new one should look like. You can see the electrode, pretty big, very nice. Now let's compare an old one. So yikes, you can see how disgusting this looks and the difference in the size of the electrode. Yeah, these are all pretty bad. This electrode, yeah, look at that spark plug gap. That is way too much gap. That electrode is pretty much gone. Finally, we can degrease the cylinder head. This was full of oil, absolutely oil dripping everywhere on the outside, but a quick hit of the pressure washer just blasts away all of that grime. Alright, so the head is now fully cleaned, and then I actually thought this was a black head before. I had no idea it was actually silver underneath, but after blasting away all that grime and oil, it's definitely looking much shinier. Before I put on the cylinder head gasket, I'm going to blow out all of these coolant and oil passages. Just make sure that there's no like debris that got stuck in there when I was cleaning that block surface. I just want to make sure everything is fully clean and give it one final wipe down before I put the new gasket back on. Here we have our new head gasket from Ellering, and then keep in mind it's only going to go on one way, the way it lines up with these holes, so that makes it easy for placement. But before we put it on, I'm going to go ahead and hit it with a little bit of copper spray. Now, some people swear by this stuff. Other people say if you're using it, you really shouldn't be building an engine by yourself because this thing sucks. But I'm gonna give it a try. If there's any small imperfections in my head when I was cleaning it, some nicks or scrapes, hopefully this will seal it up and I won't have any leaks when I'm all done. Okay, so I just hand tightened all of the bolts. Again, you start from the middle and then work your way out. I put just a little bit of oil on the threads just so they can go in a lot easier. But be careful, you don't want to have the threads have too much oil because then it can compress out of the hole and then come out into the gasket and you won't have a good seal. So I recommend just putting like a little dab on it and then wiping it off with a towel just so you have a little bit of lube to help the threads go in. And then now all we have to do is tighten each one to 22 foot-pounds, and then you tighten each one 90 degrees twice. So usually they recommend using a torque angle wrench, but I mean 90 degrees is pretty simple, it's just a quarter turn. So I'm not going to use a torque angle wrench. It's going to be pretty straightforward to tighten it, just using, you know, your wrench and using your plain vision. Next we have our camshaft housing seal. We've already taken out the old one, the inner seal. Now we also need to take out this outer seal. So to do that, I'm just going to use a pick, and yeah, it's pretty easy to come out with that. And yeah, you can see it's kind of oily. This might have been replaced once. I mean, it doesn't look too deformed, but we're gonna go ahead and replace it anyways. So this part is pretty straightforward. Just get it set in the groove to get it started, and then it's really flexible. Just pull it over and it snaps right in. No issues there. And then for the interior seal, it's gonna go this way, so make sure everything's clean, and then you can just get it started by hand, and then start pushing it in evenly all the way around. Eventually it's gonna get pretty difficult, but you just want to get it started so it's even. So if you have a seal tool, it'll be pretty easy to get this in, but you see we have quite a ways to go still. But if you don't have a seal tool, an alternative is to use a giant socket. This one is a 36mm and it fits pretty well. So let's go ahead and put the socket on top and then just lightly tap it in. It's actually working pretty well. And then periodically check to see how much you have left to go. So you can see this side is tapped in, so now we're just gonna focus on tapping in this part here. And then do a quick inspection, make sure it's fully seated, and then we're ready to put this back on. Now we're ready to put it back on. Just slightly dab, slightly dab the camshaft seal with a tiny bit of oil. That way the seal will slip on a lot easier. And then be very careful as you put this on. You don't want the lip to fold over. Next, take your camshaft gear and align the dowel with the hole. If you never moved the position of the camshaft on the head, then technically your old cam timing mark should still line up. So let's put that on. And sure enough, we do have alignment. Once your cam gear is on, then you can go ahead and put on your distributor thingy. Again, you have like a notch here, so it only goes on one way. And you'll easily feel once it's in. And then we can put in our retaining bolt. And then use a torque wrench and torque it to spec. Next, before putting the new water pump back on, I'm going to clean the block surface just to get it ready for the new gasket. Next, we'll replace the tensioner. A couple strange things. I did have this old bolt that looks like it kind of broke. Luckily, I did order all new hardware, which I was going to do anyways, because anytime you do change the tensioner, you also want to get a new spring just in case the old one has worn out. So we'll reuse this good bolt, and here are our new parts that we are going to install. So before you put the timing belt on, you just want to lock the tensioner in a little bit so that way it won't have all this resistance against it. It'll be easier to slip the belt on. So now we'll just kind of thread it in to place. You want to do the drive side tighter first and then work on the lax side after. Okay, so basically you have to max out the tensioner, and then your belt will start to come into place. Alright, so once the belt is on, just release the pressure on the tensioner. And then once the belt is tight, you can lock it down. And now we're just going to rotate the crank hub and make sure, we'll do a full 2 rotations and make sure that the tick marks are still aligned. Okay, so there's 1 rotation. And then there's the second one. So you can see how that tick mark is aligned, and then on the crank hub, that line is in line with the notch, so we're good. Once you're satisfied with the belt, snug up your top tensioner bolt first, and then you can do the bottom one. And then from there, just go ahead and reinstall your remaining parts. And also don't forget to make sure you torque this down. It's a lot easier to torque it if you put another wrench on your crankshaft bolt to hold it in place while you spin this. And then from there, just reinstall all your pulleys, your electrical components, timing covers, etc. If your pulleys and other components are looking a little worn, you can always refresh them with just a little bit of paint. In this case, I'm going to use some VHT black roll bar and chassis paint. It's good for high heat. Let's go ahead and refresh this. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and paint the valve cover as well. In this case, I'm going to convert it to black. Alright, so here are the headers, and yeah, you can tell this is looking 100 times better than the old one. So now let's go ahead and paint the old one. Yeah, it's also like 90 degrees outside, sweating, disgusting, but that's the life of a car guy.